So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, the OBBB, or One Big Beautiful Bill, is now law in the United States. And that bill eliminates the 30% tax credit for residential solar and adds restrictions to the 30% tax credit for commercial solar. And note that commercial solar also includes residential leases and power purchase agreements because they're done under a commercial business structure. So effectively, the price for cash and loan purchases of solar will go up by 30% on January 1st, 2026. Solar leasing and PPAs are more complicated, but the pricing's still going to go up somewhat. And then there's also domestic content rules, safe harbor considerations, and this thing called foreign entity of concern issues that complicate product availability and pricing starting next year. So every solar contractor I know is working like crazy to get systems installed by the end of 2025. And 2025, I think, is going to be a record year for solar and battery installations in the U.S. So smart companies right now are planning for 2026. And that raises two questions. First, what should solar contractors do to succeed in 2026 and beyond? And second, what should solar and battery customers start thinking about when evaluating products and installers? Now, this week's guest is Chris Hopper, CEO and co-founder of Aurora Solar. Chris is at the helm of the solar and battery industry's best system design tool. Here's why I'm such a big fan of Aurora. In the old days, my salespeople would go up on the roof with a ladder. Some of them really shouldn't be on the roof. They had to go walk around with grab paper and a tape measure and lay out the panels. And they used a gadget called the Solar Pathfinder, which was this plasticky paper thing to determine shading and output. Then crunch the kilowatt hour numbers based on kind of the proprietary models, run a financial simulation, create a proposal, at least 2 trips to the customer's house. And I remember my biggest worker comp issues was not the installers getting hurt, but some of these older salespeople tripping on the ladder. With Aurora, all that's automated and can be done from a laptop computer in minutes, more accurately, and easier to explain to a homeowner. I think, in my view, Aurora's done more to streamline solar sales than anything else I know. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you for having me, Barry, and for what an amazing intro. Warm my heart. I feel like we can wrap it right here and I'd be a happy man.
No, we got to tell everybody about the details of Aurora and what the new products are and things like that. So first, let's get the startup story. Tell us a little bit about Aurora Solar, how you got started, and then let's talk about some of the new features that are on the horizon at Aurora.
Yeah, happy to. We are, I guess, at this point, sort of an older company, certainly by many standards. We started back in 2013. My co-founder and I, we met in grad school and business school. And there's a whole pre-story to this whole thing. I actually spent a couple of years before that working in off-grid electrification. So trying to figure out how do we sustainably electrify off-grid communities in developing countries. And we tried different solutions. The main solution we pioneered there was small-scale solar, the idea of an energy kiosk. So this is, imagine 7 panels, kilowatt and a half or so at the time. For an entire village, people use small lead-acid batteries, like 5 amps, just to take the energy home and use it in the home for very basic applications like lighting, kerosene replacement, and so forth. This was back in 2008, 9, 10. So I spent a bunch of time in Rwanda in particular, and it's very formative for me for a couple of reasons. One, it really showed me how fundamental energy is to modern life and civilization, and what an impact it can have on people's lives. That was very remarkable to see people, not inhaling kerosene fumes in their home, having light at night to study, to, keep their shops or businesses open. Very remarkable. And, me having grown up, pretty normal middle class, but in relative privilege, right? You just, get out your couch, flip the switch or hit the button on your remote, lights come on. I just took all that for granted. So seeing that firsthand, how important energy is, was very formative. And then the other part was solar. That's how I stumbled into solar, a very small scale solar, like I said, right? Kilowatt and a half for a village rather than, think I now have 10 kilowatts up on my roof. Very different, but nonetheless, this was the early days of the current wave of solar. I was like, whoa, something's happening, right? We bought panels. I think at the time it was $3 a watt still going down, and then the next year we came back for the next project. It was $2 a watt. And I thought the previous guy ripped us off, but turns out it was, no, that was the cost curve of solar that's kept coming down. And I saw that in real time. So that was my background before even Aurora. So 2008, 9, 10. Then I met my co-founder in school, like I said, and we talked about different business ideas and actually initially wanted to start a solar installation business. That was the original idea. So we put together a 50 kilowatt system pilot project for a school. This one was again in emerging markets. This was in Nairobi, Kenya. It was Sunny Islands, well, so batteries, Hopeka batteries we installed. And it was a really cool, formative experience because we saw all the intricacies of designing these systems, all the complexities of it, and especially doing it remotely, right? We were here in California. The systems was in Kenya, right? So, many thousand miles away. Anyway, went through the whole project, soup to nuts, did everything ourselves and installed the system, and it was a great success. And then we started getting inquiries, right? People asking, hey, heard about the system. That sounds great. What can solar do for me, for my home, for my business? How much would I save? Because they heard about all the benefits of it, right? No more power cuts. That was a big issue back then. Saved on the bill every month, had no more generators to run as backup. Great value prop. And then other people started reaching out, right? They're like, hey, what can you design one for me? What should I do? How much would it save me? And we're like, well, we don't know. It depends, right? I think of this as the central question of solar, because in the end, it's a very bespoke solution, right? You need to understand the energy consumption of the building. You need to understand the rate structure. You need to understand the roof, right? How much space you have, all the setback requirements and whatnot. You might have impact from shade, neighboring buildings or trees casting shade. What's that going to do? You have many equipment choices, right, to mitigate some of the impacts of shade. Batteries make it even more complex. And so, we did it once in this ever-growing Frankensteining Excel spreadsheet that we put together. But we quickly realized if we want to do this as a business, like we can't spend all this time just running through the same analysis over and over again and such low fidelity because we did what we could with spreadsheets, but that only took us so far, right? And we knew there is a data-driven way to make these decisions and to figure out not just what's an okay solution, but ideally what's the optimal solution of solar. Because if you can design better and smarter and do it data-driven, you can actually bring down the cost of solar. You can get out more performance for the same cost. What's more, we were 1,000 miles away, so we also couldn't visit the site that easily. It's not like we can just pop over. And so that's how the idea of remote design got born, where we say, hey, rather than driving out and doing all this analysis on site, we should be able to build software that can do all of that remotely. So that was the first insight. And then we started talking to people in the US because we figured, well, people are installing solar. We're installing solar back in 2013. Surely this must be a solved problem, right? Let's figure out what people are doing and just adopt that. But we found that the status quo was not what we thought it should be, or could be, and needed to be, right? That was the second insight. You mentioned the Pathfinder, the Suneye was around to people, like you said, driving to the site, climbing on the roof, falling off the roof. But then what's worse is like, okay, you burn all this time scheduling, driving, climbing, coming back. But then what you get back is this low fidelity, solar access number on a few sample points on the roof, and then you got to translate it to system production. You still got to do all the work, and it's actually not as accurate as it should be. One example, right? You have a solar access D rate, but then you need to account for difference in a string inverter versus a microinverter, right? Solar access doesn't tell you that, what the impact is and the pros and cons of it. And so that was the genesis of Aurora, where we said, hey, this can be done remotely. It can be done in a data-driven way. And we can take out a lot of costs and streamline these businesses, make them really scalable by providing software to make remote design decisions.
It makes sense. And everything you're talking about are the struggles that I dealt with at one of my previous companies at Kina Solar. And we basically had a spreadsheet that did all that and covered almost all the jurisdictions in the 7 states we were working with. All right. So here we are with Aurora towards late 2025. RE Plus is coming up. What kind of new features and new things are coming out on the horizon at Aurora?
Yeah, we have a couple of really interesting ones that, our role is we don't install, right? We're a pure software company. Our whole mission, our whole day-to-day is about making people like you, your lives easier, right? Helping you scale your businesses, helping your businesses adapt also in this particular year to the shifting landscape, right? We've gone as an industry through just a ton of change the last couple of years, and then OBBB adds another layer, right? And yet another change. So what does that mean? And then how can we help you and everyone out there, right? One obviously is with the 25D going away, but 48E sticking around. There's going to be just a shift in the mix, the financing mix in the market, right? So leases and PPAs going to retain the ITC, and as you mentioned, there's additional complexities to it now, but that's a big shift, right? So we are working hard on helping connect installers to financing sources, partnering with all the lease and PPA providers out there to make PPA lease financing available in the product. So that's a big theme. We've launched a number of new integrations. There'll be more coming, so we can connect financing to the projects, the installers out there. Also in the works is not yet released, but the team's working hard on helping, manage AVLs and so forth for DOMCON requirements. And then with FIOC requirements, we're looking at that as well, trying to understand what exactly are the requirements and how might we help in that so we can take away or, streamline away some of the complexity that's happening and that's going to come towards the industry. So that's one big theme for us at Aurora. How do we help the industry navigate that shift? That you have financing options in a streamlined way, integrated in our proposal tool. Another one, two actually other super exciting one. We have a plan set product. And there's a lot of complexity in generating plan sets. We're looking to automate more and more of it. As you know, it's a pretty gnarly problem, but ideal world to be productized. So we have what we call an instant plan set product where with a few inputs, you can automatically generate a plan set for your project. So that's early stages, but something I'm super excited about. And so we're working through all the requirements and all the shifting equipment landscape too, with storage in particular adds a whole bunch of complexity to that. And then the third part is an exciting project on the acquisition side. We're looking at connecting installers with homeowners who have interest in solar, want to go solar, and so we have a new marketplace coming out where homeowners can shop for solar, get educated on solar, and then get connected to the installers at the end of the day. As you know, acquisition costs are a huge part of the soft cost stack. And what OBBB does is that it puts us a bit on notice as an industry. Like thankfully, we have a couple of years more with a tax credit, at least on 48E. But the writing's on the wall, and we as an industry, we have to rejigger the cost stack and mitigate the impact of tax credits going away. And that's going to require all of us to work together to ultimately bring down the cost of solar to, build an industry that can thrive post ITC as well.
That makes total sense. All right. So, and we all know that the OBB is probably bad, definitely not a good thing. At a high level, what do you think the overall impact is going to be on residential sales in 2026 in the different, categories here, loan,
Mm.
cash, PPA?
Yeah, I mean, look, overall, unfortunately, we're looking at a year of decline. So volumes undoubtedly going to go down across the industry. In the past year, the market was roughly 50/50 cash/loan, so customer owned versus TPO. Well, the cash loan side is going to be impacted undoubtedly, probably at least a 50% decline in that segment. You mentioned a 30% cost difference. It's actually even worse, right? From a customer perspective, if it's customer owned, a 30% losing the 30% tax credit actually is more of a 50% almost increase in overall costs, all things equal for the homeowner. So very material difference. And then the question is how much can TPO absorb and how much of what would have been 25D volume can be, moved over, if you will, through PPAs or leases, and how much of the market is going to adopt that. So that's the big question for us for the industry in the next year. And that's where, again, those initiatives I mentioned come in because they're targeted at A, connecting installers to financing sources, and B, helping bring down the cost, right? Streamlining plan set generation, permitting, and then also hopefully making a dent in the acquisition costs that have been so stubbornly sticky.
Yeah, totally agree. And we can talk more about the plan sets and about the financing and things like
Mm.
that. I got some thoughts there, but all right. So that leaves us with two big questions. We did a lot of kind of background introductions, but what should solar contractors do to succeed in 2026 and beyond? So that's one from a solar contractor standpoint. And from the standpoint of customers, what should the customers think about, solar and battery customers, when evaluating products and installers?
Yeah, two very, I say, big questions, right? Going right to the heart of it. Yeah, for installers, it's twofold. One is really thinking about the financing mix and thinking what's right if you don't have a TPO solution. I think it's a good one to have in the, in the quiver. Now, maybe it's not a fit for every homeowner, but for those who prefer the economics that can come with it due to the tax credit and who are, happy with a lease CPA, I think that's a great option. But then the other part is like I said, like we got to figure out how to bring down costs, right? The costs have been, we've seen a lot of decline on the hard cost side, right? The hardware has come down significantly over the last decade or so that I've been in the industry, or almost a decade and a half now. But the soft costs have been stubbornly sticky. Look, in the end, hardware, hard costs, that's like there's only so much you can do. Yeah, panels can give it a bit cheaper and, battery costs come down. But like in the end, it's atoms you got to ship, you got to assemble, you got to, right? There's a lower limit to it. So we can't bank on that. And panels are only what 15 maybe percent of system cost anyway, 15 to 20% or so. So if you think, okay, another 10% decline on 15, 20%, that's only a 1.5 to 2% reduction overall system cost. So the hardware side is not what's going to save the industry. It has to come from the soft cost side. We need to figure out a more scalable way of getting the glass on the roof and the batteries on the wall. And yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know there's one answer to it. I think it's going to require all of us to come together and look at every slice of the cost stack and of operations and streamline the heck out of it. And, take out, cents per watt here and 5 cents per watt here and 15% a watt there and really rethink the whole thing. And again, thankfully we have a couple of years with 4080 sticking around to do that. But my hope for the industry and what I also implore people is to not just squander that time, right? Because again, the writing's on the wall and we can't just take that for granted. So that's my hope for the next phase, that we figure this part out. And if we do, I think we'll have a bright future because the tailwinds are still there, right? We're all believers in this product. And energy costs keep going up even faster than before. People are switching to EVs, right? That's going to push the consumption up. It's going to push the consumption to more expensive tiers. So it's actually a nonlinear effect. Wildfires and whatnot become, continue to be an issue. So there's so many value props to this that are going to layer in and that are going to compound over time. So we have strong tailwinds, but it has to be both. It has to be the tailwinds plus the cost reduction, the efficiencies we create as an industry.
Yeah, I really like your analogy of atoms versus electrons. Atoms is the hardware, electrons is everything else. And Mark Andreessen basically said that software is going to eat hardware, and it's
Mhm.
really happening very, very clearly in the solar business. Solar panels, God, I mean, I'm hearing stories about 10 cents a watt X factory, and battery prices are coming down really fast. One of the things that we look at is the velocity of projects. It's kind of hard to
Mm.
kind of measure the exact cost with each step and how much it costs. But if you can just compress that project from 6 months down to 6 weeks, in almost every single case, it turns out to be much more profitable for the installer.
Yeah. You
And
also get paid faster, huh?
everything, it's like it's the lead to cash cycle. So how does your software start to aggregate all that? And the more you can aggregate those steps that go through that process, the faster you're going to move and the more accurate data you're going to have throughout the whole project.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly where we play, right? There's two other maybe mental models I can share that I use when I think about what we do about the process of going solar for the homeowner, right? So one is actually a lot of people talk about efficiency, like this panel has that efficiency or that, but I think it's actually not the most important efficiency in this business. I think about dollar efficiency, right? For every dollar the homeowner spends, how many dollars end up on the roof and on the wall? Right? And that's shockingly low, right? That's maybe 30, 40%, right? So you spend 20, 30, $40,000 on a system. You spend 40,000 bucks. If you're lucky, 20,000 bucks ends up on your roof and on the walls, right? Probably less than that. Not very efficient, right? So that's the real efficiency we need to crack as an industry. And then the other part is that whole life cycle of, going solar, right? You start with a homeowner starts getting interested, right? They start as a lead, then they get educated, they get, close to get through the sales process. It becomes a closed deal. And then you move it through all the design and permitting stages, the financing, right? And then through the install. And then, of course, there's a 20-year life beyond that. But in an ideal world, we can compress that whole life cycle from lead to install, like you said, and just, ideal world, it's just be one day. Now, that's not practical, but I like it as sort of an aspirational, directional goal because it makes me then think like, okay, what are all the things that need to happen to compress that? And maybe it's in the end, it's not the day, it's a week or it's 2 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks. But that's what we need to figure out as an industry and how do we take out those costs. And that's where I think we come in, right? Where we can provide at least the software side of things and the processes and the data-driven, decision making to get there and to whittle away and shave off days and weeks. So as an example, our, design solution, initially was a big first contribution. You can save, many hours of labor by just designing remotely. And you can probably take out a week or two between scheduling and driving out and, then all the design work. So that's a big one. That's where the plan set product comes in. We're like, okay, how do we, in the ideal world, generating a plan set should just be hitting a button, right? You have the proposal, you have the layout, and for the most part, there's a few more inputs, of course, you need. I know it's not as simple as that, but the more we can compress that, the more it can improve the way folks can iterate and make changes to the plan set, the more we can just take out those costs and compress those timelines. And then the other part is the customer side, right? How do we create transparency with the homeowner, right? How do we create trust with the homeowner, right? In the past years, as an industry, we unfortunately, at least in some areas, we've squandered some trust in some back practices that have been established and has left some folks out there with a bad experience. And I think we need to move away from that because in the end, the product that really can impact people's lives, and it should, and it can put dollars into people's pockets, right? And these utility bill is not a discretionary expense, right? It's something that, one of the first things you got to pay to literally keep the lights on, and anything you save a homeowner on that to hedge the energy costs for the next 20 years, that's a huge, huge impact because those dollars can go to, groceries and can go to kids' education and whatever else it might be. And so that's where we need to go as an industry.
Well, one of the things I like among many with Aurora is the ability to help our company, and I'm doing installations only here in Silicon Valley, but help our company differentiate ourselves from the other competitors, about competitors who are just, coming in from totally remotely and designing a battery system. So really trying to sell more on value and reputation rather than just low price. What are some of the features and improvements that Aurora has that are going to help us customize things and sell more on value, which is going to allow us to have, yes, we want a higher price because we need to be profitable and to do a terrific job.
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways, right? One is, we've always prided ourselves in, being the most sort of rigorous and accurate solution. It's not so hard to, you know, slap some rectangles on a Google Maps image and, send it to the customer and run PV watts, but you really lose a lot of accuracy, and it comes at a cost. And what we found and what we believe in is that there's not a huge trade-off. We can actually make a very usable piece of software that allows you to create a 3D model of the home and run all this analysis in just as easily as it would be to slap, maybe even easier to slap the panels on the Google Maps. It's not harder, but it gives you a meaningfully better result. So you as a installer, you feel like you can do a better job. And then that can also translate to trust with a homeowner. So I hear that a lot with our customers that they show up with an Aurora proposal, and that analysis and the rigor translates to the homeowner and gives a homeowner confidence in, that you all did the right analysis on their behalf. And then the other part is customization, right? Every company has, their own story, their own value prop. And so we also built our tools increasingly to be customizable to allow you to translate that to the homeowner so that you can make it your own and communicate and tell your story and your value prop. So it's a combination of those things for me.
That makes the product, the service very, very useful. One of the huge changes that happened over the last 5 years was moving from just solar to
Mm-hmm.
solar and batteries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible to have a spreadsheet with the number of rows you need and calculations to figure out what's the energy bill before solar and the energy bill after solar. I did that on Excel since 2001. It works, it's manageable. But when it came to modeling batteries accurately, you needed like,
Mm-hmm.
interval data from the utility every hour, or even every 15 minutes. And that ends up with a spreadsheet for each customer of, 38,000 lines. It's impossible. So it's really, really useful within Aurora for us to be able to say to a customer, this is what you're going to save with solar, and here's how much more you're going to save with batteries. Can you talk a little bit more about how that's useful both to the installer and the customer?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, this is again where our first project was almost glimpse into the future because we installed this big battery bank at the time. This was 2013, and we did the same thing, right? We downloaded, we sent someone out with was it CTs to like measure the consumption of each circuit. There was no download. Try to figure out how do we size these batteries. But then we focused on the US, right? So 2013 onwards, really, we were all US focused. And back then it was really only solar, right? There was no mention whatsoever of batteries. The first time I heard sort of people installing batteries was maybe 2017, roughly.
Yep. Powerwall came out around then, LG Powerwall Solar Edge. Yep.
Yeah, but it was like, it was like single digit percent of the total market, mostly backup focused. And, I remember the debates were like, oh, should we invest in this? Like, when should we invest in it? Everyone was still very much just installing grid-tied solar. But then, of course, it picked up. And with the NEM change in California, that was really the sort of watershed moment. That's when it flipped and storage became just an integral part of the whole value prop. So today we're no longer the solar industry, right? Where, it's solar plus storage. Also, actually, interestingly, if you look at more mature markets, right, say Germany, that's where every market eventually goes, right? You need to, at some point, at some level of penetration, combine solar with storage. So it's sort of the natural cycle of this industry. And then, of course, the question is like, well, designing solar is already not straightforward and to do it well, but then battery adds a whole other layer of complexity to it. And that's where another place where software can be super powerful, where we can provide the analytics, the tools for you to model that accuracy accurately, all the different modes, grid, arbitrage and backup and whatnot, and show the trade-offs of like, okay, if you add another battery, here's the cost and here's the benefit, right? And then translate that value prop to the homeowner and communicate it well, right? Because with all the complexity, it's not just the design complexity. That's one thing if only us here in the industry have to think about it, but actually it adds complexity to the homeowner, right? It makes the sale more complex and the story more complex. And it's already a complex story. Now it's even more complex. And that's the other place where our proposal tool, for example, we spend a lot of time investing in that and how do we visualize, how do we communicate, how do we show the value to the homeowner so that that kitchen table conversation can be effective and we can bridge the gap with a homeowner and help them understand why a battery is important, what the value can add, and what the trade-offs are between different topologies, different products, different sizes, different modes. So yeah, that's a big thing that we keep thinking about every day.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. My cousin was interested in putting in solar a month or so ago, kind of squeezing it under the last minute, barely got there. And then, they talked about a battery. They want a battery. Should they put in one battery? Should they put in two batteries? What about this battery? What about that battery?
Yeah.
And it was really easy within Aurora to say, okay, here's your bar graph with your savings before and after with solar.
Hmm.
Here's what happens with a battery. Here's what
Yep.
happens with two batteries. And it just made it so much more authoritative and accurate because it used to be without those tools, you just kind of had to guess, mostly selling batteries based on the benefit of backup power. But now
Yeah.
we can, show them numbers. It definitely increases the payback a little bit, but we know what those numbers are, and they've been pretty darn accurate. I was really, really happy about that.
Yeah, that makes me very happy. That's what we're all about. And again, it takes out that, that gap, right? Because otherwise you as an installer just have to kind of guess or ballpark it, and homeowner has to kind of then just trust you to that you kind of guess and ballpark, And this takes it away because you can just say, okay, here's the data, here's the simulation, here's what it would do, here's how the battery charges and discharges, and it just closes that gap. And I think that's a really important piece.
All right. Okay. So here we are towards the end of 2025. OBBB is in effect. 30% is going to go away. Things are going to be
Mhm.
more complicated, more expensive next year. What should residential customers think about right now when they're considering solar, both maybe to squeeze in for 2025, but realistically, in many cases, what should they think about for solar and batteries in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you as a homeowner, if you're interested in owning solar outright, now's the time to do it. Like, don't lose any time. I know a lot of installers are already quite backed up, and to get the panels on the roof, right, and to get you to qualify by year end, there isn't a lot of time. So really would encourage people to make that decision now, or at least to engage in a conversation, reach out, get a couple quotes, right, find an installer that has capacity and one that you trust and you have confidence in, and then, if the number is pencil, I would strongly encourage people to pull the trigger. I mentioned to you earlier before we started recording that I actually just went solar yesterday. Now I had actually
Good
I
timing
saw
for this podcast.
it's perfect between me going solar and yesterday and RE Plus in just 3 days. It is perfect timing for this podcast. But
And as an installer, now you know why I have no more hair because I'm dealing with all those battery design issues.
there you go. Hopefully our software saved you a few of the remaining hairs. But yeah, that's a big one. I was in the process anyway, but as soon as OB3 dropped, I was like, okay, we're gonna get this thing on the roof. And I mentioned to you we had to actually make some compromises on the panel choice to pick something that was available to not risk the timeline. And I'm very happy that we got that done in time. And then next year, I mean, look, there's gonna be a harder choice then between the financing options, right? People will obviously still install a cash or loan system for you, but the economics may be more, difficult on that side of the market or not as attractive. And then it's a question of like, okay, do you still prefer the ownership and do you find an installer that can do it at the right price for your geography? It always depends on where you are, right? I think many places in California can still be in the money, especially with a more efficient cost stack on well, what would have been 25D. But then for a lot of other geographies, probably going to be looking at leases and PAs, and that still can be a great value prop for homeowners. It can meaningfully reduce your bill or at least hedge it for the foreseeable future and hedge against this inflation, that's utility rate inflation that's coming up. I'd always encourage people to get a couple quotes, right? Reach out to not just one, but a few installers, compare, have conversations. Look at price, because in the end, you're competing with kilowatt hours that come out from your utility. Price has to be right, but also find someone you trust, right? And someone who does good work, has a good reputation, and who's been in business for a while and they can rely on. So that's the other part. And the final thing is, for a lot of Americans, it's not just about the kilowatt hours or the cost per kilowatt hour and the utility bill. It is also that additional value prop of peace of mind and resilience. And us here in California, we think a lot about the wildfires. And I actually we had a big fire here in Palisades, and I was just a few miles away, so it was very close to home, even though we were not directly impacted. But even outside of California, right? I remember there was a blizzard in Texas. Was it just 2 years ago or so? 3 now? And we saw the volumes in our software, and actually on a per capita basis, there was more solar quoted in Texas during that time than in California. It was pretty remarkable, right? Because when the lights go out and you have no power for the week, you think about it differently. Like, oh shoot, the value prop now is like, what is it worth to me to provide for my family and to continue living my life when things go wrong? And whether that's blizzards in Texas or wildfires in California or hurricanes in Florida, the same thing. There is that additional value prop where solar plus storage can be it's a very flexible solution, even if you're not off grid, right? If you're in a even somewhat disaster prone area, I think there's a strong value prop that goes way beyond the per kilowatt hour economics.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right, last question. This is a tough one. This is your crystal ball economic change, but how many years is it going to take for us to kind of recover the economics we have in 2025 with the 30% tax credit kind of going forward? Lots of good news, like utility rates are going up and people need more security in terms of reliability of power and the equipment costs are coming down. But how many
Mm.
more years is it going to be before we're kind of rocking and rolling as an industry the way we are right now?
I think it depends. And I think it depends on how we react as an industry, right? Going back to the point I was making earlier, right? We have those tailwinds, right? So some areas see, 8% rate increases every year, probably for the next couple of years. So that's going to chip away, right? So we lost 30%, we can, get 8% back, so to speak, in 1 year. And then we're going to get maybe another 8% a year after. So then we're like halfway there. But that can't be the only piece of it. It also depends on, can we bring down the costs, right? Can we sell the same product at lower costs and still obviously have, make the economics work for the installers? And that's going to require, I don't think there's a magic, like a silver bullet. It is going to require us to look at every single slice of the cost stack. And again, it's about shaving cents per watt off here and there. And I think if we do both, hopefully 2 to 3 years, we're sort of back where we were. That's sort of a middle of the road, I'd say, estimate. Hopefully, we can be very disciplined and not sort of just take the 48E extension for granted and not do the work we need to do to transition to that post ITC world. And in a way, it gets me excited. All these shocks to the system. We had the NEM change in California. That was a big one. But every time these shocks happen, they're very painful. But if we work through them the right way, we actually get more resilient as an industry, right? Like whatever the next NEM change is, it's going to be less impactful because we're like, well, I'm behind my meter. Like you utility, you do what you want. I don't care that much. I'm behind my meter, and if I need to slap a DC expansion on my power wall, I'll do that. And it's not going to be the same level of shock. So in a way, it's kind of an investment, painful one, but an investment in a more resilient industry. And I hope we can do the same thing with the ITC, because once we're in a place as an industry where we can operate economically without an ITC, and I'm like, well, any incentives can be a bonus, but we're not dependent on it, and the tailwinds will stay there and the value proper will remain. And I think that'd be a great place to be. And so that's what keeps me bullish about the industry. The solar coaster is real. Been on it now for, decade and a half. So I definitely have felt ups and downs with all of our customers. But I really think, in a couple of years, we can be in a place where we're a much more resilient industry with a bright future that just looks at, steady growth and delivers, a compelling value prop to homeowners at the right price. And I think that's a very, very meaningful thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. Well, just kind of wrapping things up. I'm glad you're on the solar coaster with the rest of the industry. You and your team are doing a tremendous amount to kind of make the ride a little bit smoother and help us kind of, recover from that. But all right, that's enough about solar and batteries. What do you do for fun? Tell us a little bit about some of the personality, non-work things.
What I do for fun? I think solo is fun. That's one of the things I do for fun. It's more challenging fun than some days, but very rewarding. But that aside, well, I just had a baby girl 11 months ago, so that's been a ton of fun just to see her grow and learn and thrive. And she just took her first steps a
Oh,
few weeks ago, which is just one of the magical moments. Other than that, because of her, I haven't been out for a while, but actually I'm an avid skydiver. So on the weekends before she was born, certainly you'd find me at the drop zone, jumping from planes, and that's been just a wonderful, magical experience for me as well.
wow, that's fantastic. All right. Well, how can people get in touch with Aurora Solar?
Yeah, quite easy. www.aurorasolar.com. Reach out, leave your contact. We have a lot of materials also just to educate people, even if you're not a customer, if you want to learn about the industry and all the changes, right? That's a big part of increasingly what we do is help people navigate this environment because we see a lot across the industry. That's a cool thing that's developed, right? As we've become sort of the market leading solution, we just see a whole breadth of practices and people, doing this work. And so we can be very helpful there. Of course, if you're interested, sign up, try out the product. And I hear from many customers that couldn't imagine running the business without, and that just makes me happy. And maybe that's the case for you as well. And then finally, given that RE Plus is upon us, if you're out in Vegas, come stop by our booth, say hi, take the product for a spin, talk to me, talk to the team. And yeah, above all, let's have a conversation of how we can evolve this industry and get it ready for the next phase of growth.
All right, that's terrific. Thanks, Chris, for joining me. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you missed any of today's show, you can always go to our website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's Energy Show.